Alright, what's going on YouTube? Today I wanted to continue talking about the Saint Seiya live action movie that is coming very soon, Knights of the Zodiac. If you didn't already know, I made several videos about this film, reacting to trailers of it, covering all the news and interviews that have come out from a lot of the people working on the film, as well as actors and actresses, etc, etc. Recently I made a video talking about my thoughts and impressions of the film before I actually go to see it in May. And yeah, basically I just kind of wanted to make a part 2 because as it turns out I had more to talk about. So yeah, if you haven't already seen that video, feel free to check that one out and then come back to this one in case you want to catch up on all the things that I've already talked about. But for this video I'm going to talk a little bit more about other things that I didn't mention in that video. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so in that video I mentioned that from the 2 trailers that we've gotten so far, and again we could get more trailers that show more promising things for the film, but since the film's release date is so soon, I highly doubt that that's going to happen. But yeah, from the 2 trailers that we've gotten, I mentioned that as far as the tone goes, it really kind of feels like we're just getting a typical Hollywood action movie with the Saint Seiya skin over it, and it seems like they're going for that origin story route. It almost reminds me, or is a little bit reminiscent of, the Ghost in the Shell live action. I do need to make a full-on video reviewing that film, but one of the things I got from that film was they did take the story of Ghost in the Shell, and towards the end of it they definitely gave it that origin story kind of vibe that you get with a lot of superhero or just action movies in general, and there's nothing wrong with that. I do think that with that approach they're trying to take something that is foreign to most people, especially in the sense of Ghost in the Shell for that time in 2017. And you know, they're trying to make it more consumable by putting in something that we all are more familiar with, right? And I do think that for Ghost in the Shell, it kind of worked. Like, it didn't really have any negative effects of the film in my opinion, but again, I'll talk more about that in a separate video. But for this film, because they're trying to make this a live action film franchise and spread the story across 6 different movies, in theory it makes sense why they would want to make this more of an origin story film. However, that can also be not the smartest idea if this film ends up tanking and the other 5 films don't even get made because of the negative reception that this first one receives. That also brings me to the live action Battle Angel Alita, which I thought was actually a really cool movie and done really well. Again, I'm gonna make a separate video reviewing that movie in full, but for the most part I really did like that movie. However, that also kind of has a similar issue to where the story ends on kind of a note that's not really the end and sets up for a sequel that's more or less just unpromised to us. Like, there's somewhat of a setup towards the end of the film that's like, okay, now we kind of wait for, you know, part 2 or the next Battle Angel movie. But I mean, that movie came out a while ago and we still haven't gotten anything new for when the next film's gonna come out. I guess part of that is because James Cameron is involved heavily with that film, and James Cameron's been working on the Avatar movies, so who really knows when we're gonna get the Battle Angel sequel. But I'm hoping it's sooner than later because again, I really was a fan of that movie, and yeah, I would love to see more of those, to be honest. But I'm not sure how I'd feel about the same thing happening to Saint Seiya. Whereas for one, I'm not even sure if I'm gonna be as much of a fan of this movie as I was of the Battle Angel movie, because I think the Battle Angel movie kind of works better in a live action setting than I think Saint Seiya, or at least this Saint Seiya movie, is going to. But yeah, I kind of wanted to elaborate more on me saying that, oh, this doesn't look very Saint Seiya-esque, and just talk about what I gravitate towards as a Saint Seiya fan and why I don't really see that present from the trailers that we've gotten. I mentioned it in my top 10 favorite shonen anime of all time video, but one of the things about Saint Seiya that I really gravitate towards is the characters, and just the friendship that all these characters build upon, the saints as you will. They really build this friendship together in the midst of trying to protect Athena, and you can really just see how each character does have their own sort of arc that they go through in their development, but in the end they have each other's backs, and it's just really cool to see. And a lot of the characters I really do like, especially Shiryu. He's gotta be one of my favorite characters. I loved his whole going blind arc. That was so cool to me. So yeah, stuff like that is what I really love about Saint Seiya, and I think just overall the world of Saint Seiya itself is pretty simple in the sense of, you know, if you watch a lot of shonen anime or know anything about shonen, especially in that time or in that era of like Yu Yu Hakusho, Dragon Ball, you know, like older style shonen, you can kind of get a sense of how the story progresses, how the power-ups work and everything like that. And then you combine with something that I know a lot of people, most people in fact, are familiar with, like Greek mythology, and not just Greek, but it dives into other mythologies as well. But you take those 2 things, then you can kind of get a sense of what to expect from the world of Saint Seiya. And not saying that that's a bad thing, I like that it keeps it somewhat simple for the most part when we talk about the world of Saint Seiya and just the overall story, because the execution of the story is so well done. And I think that's one of the things I love about Saint Seiya the most, is that it doesn't really try super hard to be too unique, right? Or too complicated or too complex or whatever. It just knows what it wants to do. It knows the story it wants to tell, and it just tells it. It executes it so well. It's a pretty easy story to follow, but the entire time that I follow it, I still really enjoy it. And I think that it has aspects of it that really show the best things about its story from the time that it comes from. Also, a little side note, I think I'm gonna have to make another video just strictly talking about the idea of storytelling and the difference between like simple and complex stories, and how a lot of people bring this negative connotation to the idea of a story being simple, when in actuality it really shouldn't be looked at as simple, because in a lot of times stories being too complex are much worse. And you know, there's a whole conversation to dissect there, but yeah, I just don't want me talking about Saint Seiya's story to come off in any way disrespectful, because by no means am I saying I don't like the story or anything. Like, I love the story, and I think there are elements of it that are quote unquote simple, but that's why I love it. That's what I love about it. And yeah, I just don't want it to seem like I'm insulting the story or the storyteller or anything about Saint Seiya in that sense by saying that it's simple. Just a little side tangent there. I will address that conversation for another video. But yeah, those are some of the things that I really love about Saint Seiya, and I really wanted to bring that up because I feel like it's important to know why people like this series, especially if you plan on making multiple live action films of the series. Like, from what I was reading in a lot of the interviews of this Saint Seiya live action movie, it seemed like they really wanted to go for something that was really true to the series at first, with the writers being like, oh hey, you know, we understand anime and we understand that a lot of it is straight to the point and it strikes you to the heart and your emotions and everything. And then the choreographer was apparently huge into anime and wanted to make these fights that seemingly just feel like anime told from a live action perspective. And I was like, oh man, like I'm getting really hyped. And even the actors were seemingly interested in this movie as well, saying like, oh, you know, anime live action is soon to be the next thing, or like the next big topic of discussion, so we really want to give our all and portray these characters the best we can. I was like, yo, this movie seems really hype. It seems like everyone kind of knows what they're doing. Toei Animation's involved. Famke Janssen's in the movie, which again, I don't know how that happened or transpired, but I'm still very grateful. But it just seemed like there was a totally different vibe for this movie leading into it before we actually got the trailers. But now that we've gotten the trailers and we can kind of see a little bit more of what's happening here, I do feel like there's a little bit of disconnect, and it's unfortunate, but I think the writers are trying to understand the story of Saint Seiya and maybe take one story within the mini stories of Saint Seiya and like really focus on that and try to make that a film. And I can see why in theory that would work on paper. Is like, okay, they want to take the story of Seiya, or like a story within Saint Seiya, primarily something that Seiya goes through himself. Like, oh, he wants to bring his sister back to life or something. Like, let's focus on that story and make a movie out of that. And then for the next 5 films, we'll focus on other characters, introduce them slowly, and focus on their stories and their character arcs, etc. Like, I can kind of see maybe that's what they're thinking, or that's what they want to go for. And in the end, we have kind of all these characters and they've all had their stories and their moments in their movies, right? And maybe that's what the intent was. But I feel like they're trying so hard to focus on these stories individually and separately from the franchise itself, without trying to understand the true essence of Saint Seiya and like what makes Saint Seiya so cool. Like, it's one thing to understand a story within Saint Seiya's world and try to make a movie out of that. But I think especially if you're going to make multiple movies and try to make a whole franchise of live action films for this manga, you need to understand what people love about this franchise in the first place and what people love about Saint Seiya as a whole. And to me, I think it really does have a lot to do with the characters and how they all come together. Like, I think a lot of people want to see the squad, you know, all the saints together, right? Like, I think that's one of the things anyway that stands out as really cool about Saint Seiya, or like at the very least stands out from other shonen is that you have kind of these guardians of Athena, and they're all supposed to assemble together in a way, but once you get down to the nitty-gritty, they all do have a lot of character to them, and they have each other's backs, and they all just really start to build this friendship, and it's just really cool. It's really fun to watch. And you have characters like Iki that kind of acts as a rival to Seiya's character, which I will say it does seem like they're somewhat trying to get that right, or that maybe the strongest element that they have that's closest to the Saint Seiya we all know and love so far. So I will, I guess, give them props on that. But I feel like we're not going to get to see any of the other saints in this movie, like Shiryu and some of the other characters which I can't think of off the top of my head right now. But yeah, I think they're going to try and save all these other characters for all these other different movies that, again, may or may not happen, depending on the success of this movie. And I guess it is hard because for a live action movie, you can't like introduce too many characters at once, right? That's why, thinking about it now, it may have been better to do this as a live action show instead, but I guess it's too late to really talk about that now since the film is almost about to come out in a few months. But yeah, I think it is kind of apparent that they don't really understand certain things about Saint Seiya as a whole, as a franchise, that people really love about the series, and it kind of shows in the trailers that we've gotten. And I think that that's going to negatively affect how this film is received, which may in turn make it so that future films don't actually come to fruition and it just ends up a failure, like a lot of Hollywood live action adaptations of anime, unfortunately. Like, just to give a little example, if I were in charge of this movie, I already mentioned before how Shiryu is one of my favorite characters, but another thing that I really like about Saint Seiya is I think it plays really well to the time that it was made. I feel like if I were to tell Shiryu's story in live action, I would want to travel back in time to a lot of the films that were being made around Saint Seiya's time and really try to tell Shiryu's story with, an old school kung fu aesthetic. Because especially with him going blind and, the trials and tribulations that he goes through with his master, like, these are things that I think Saint Seiya could play really well to. And if we had a director or someone with a vision that wants to take it back to those times for certain areas to play on those aesthetics, I think it would be really cool, instead of just trying to put Saint Seiya into the modern world and somehow make everything work and come together to where it just almost doesn't even fit, right? I mean, you have these like Roman Colosseum type worlds, and then next thing you know, you see agents with guns that look like Halo, and it's like, I don't know if it's really all gonna mesh together well. But I don't think they had to do that at all. Just because you make a film in modern day doesn't mean you have to make the whole aesthetic modern, You have shows like Stranger Things or even American Horror Story where the time that those shows were filmed isn't reflective of the setting of the world that those shows take place in. And I think that's something that not only Saint Seiya, but a lot of anime live action could benefit from if they had directors that used their creativity and thought outside of the box. But obviously film is a very collaborative form of art, so if you get a bunch of heads together that don't really understand the series, but they're hired to make something that's watchable, I guess it's just gonna come off as that. As, hey, we got these people here together to make a film of an anime that none of them really watched, and like, it's gonna come off as that if that's exactly what it is. But this is why I think live action anime can be done right if you just have the right person in charge. You have someone that understands fully the anime and the franchise itself and knows how to assign all the different parts of filmmaking to their respective jobs to make their vision really come to life and make the anime come to life in film in the best way possible. But it's pretty apparent we haven't gotten there yet, and maybe just maybe, if your boy were to potentially be in that position of being in charge, you know what I'm saying? Maybe, Hollywood might get there, but, until then, until that happens, here we are. But yeah, that's gonna be it for this one, guys. Part 2 of my thoughts and impressions going into this Saint Seiya live action Knights of the Zodiac film. What did you guys think about anything that I had to say? Let me know in the comments below. Please leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. That helps me out a ton. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll see y'all in the next video.